In this scene from the anime Frieren, Stark is animated at a noticeably lower frame rate than Fern, and that's not a mistake. The studio did that on purpose to make him feel awkward. Anime studios have been using frame rate as a storytelling tool for decades, and I'm going to show you exactly how. I get comments all the time from people saying things like, "This anime has bad animation because it's not fluid," or "That show clearly has no budget because the characters barely move." And I get it. On the surface, fewer frames can look like a studio is cutting corners. But here's what most people don't realize. The number of frames in any given scene is almost always a deliberate choice. Studios aren't just randomly deciding how smooth something looks. They're using frame rate the same way a film director uses lighting or camera angles. It's a tool. So today I'm going to break down exactly how anime studios use different frame rates on purpose, why fewer frames can actually make a scene better, and by the end of this video, you're going to start noticing this in every anime you watch. So before I get into the creative side of things, let me quickly explain what I mean when I say frame rate in animation, because it's a little different from frame rate in video games or movies. Most anime is produced at 24 frames per second, but that does not mean that there are 24 unique drawings per second. That would take forever and cost a fortune. Instead, animators will hold a single drawing for multiple frames. So if you're animating on ones, that means that every single frame of the video has a new drawing. 24 unique drawings per second, or 24 frames per second. Usually this results in super smooth, super fluid animation, and this is typically what you see in certain high-budget action scenes. If you're animating on twos, then each drawing is held for 2 frames. So you're looking at 12 unique drawings per second. This is actually one of the standards for most anime. It still looks smooth to the human eye, and it cuts the workload in half. And then there's animating on threes, or even fours, where each drawing is held for 3 or 4 frames. That gives you maybe 8 or 6 unique drawings per second. This looks noticeably choppier, but as I'm going to show you, that choppiness can be used on purpose. Let's say that you have 12 drawings for emotion. If you put those 12 drawings on ones, each one shows up for a single frame, and the entire thing plays out in like half a second. Super fast, super snappy. Like I said, it makes it look fluid, but it also makes the scene go by very, very fast. Now, take a look at the exact same 12 drawings, but spread them out on twos. Each drawing is held for 2 frames, and so now the motion takes a full second. It feels slower, it feels a little bit less chaotic than the first option, but we didn't change anything about the drawings, we just spaced them out on the timeline. And now the same thing with threes. If we have each drawing held for 3 frames, then those 12 drawings will take a second and a half to actually play out. The motion feels a lot heavier, more deliberate, and obviously slower. So here's where it gets interesting for people working on their own animations. If you have a shot that needs to last 2 seconds and you're animating on ones, then that means you need 48 unique drawings to fill that time. Imagine trying to draw 48 individual drawings in order to just span 2 seconds. Now, if you're animating on twos, then you only need 24 drawings. On threes, you only need 16 drawings, and so on and so forth, in order to fill the same 2 seconds of screen time. The general rule of thumb is that if you want your animation to be smoother, then you need to have more drawings in order to fill the same amount of time. This is why studios mix up their frame rates within different scenes, and even within a single scene. They're not just choosing how smooth something looks, they're also managing how many drawings they need to produce for each shot, where those drawings will have the most impact, and obviously how to space out those drawings to still provide a smooth experience. So let me show you a real example from one of my own animations to prove it. This animation is comprised of about 6 drawings. Since I animated this on threes, each drawing is held for about 3 frames, and so that's about 18 frames total. As you can see, I'm holding the first frame and then it moves into the rest. So that gives it a bit more of a natural motion. Fun fact, when I was doing the storyboarding and layout for this scene, I actually took a stopwatch and timed myself actually doing the motion, and it roughly timed out to about this speed and this time frame. Now, watch what happens when we take those 6 drawings and squish them down so that they're animated on 2s instead. The final timeline comes to about 12 frames total, or 6 drawings exposed 2 frames each. You can see that the motion is noticeably quicker. It's a little bit snappier. Now, it's not bad, but it also is a little bit too fast for the intention of the scene. And then the same thing if I were to place these 6 frames on 1s, that's a total of 6 frames, or a quarter of a second. It literally flies by. It's so fast that it's really, really unnatural to look at. And you can see, these are the exact same drawings. I haven't changed anything about them other than the way that they are spaced out on the timeline. It's a completely different feel. And if you think about it, if I wanted the 1s version to last as long as the 3s version, I'd need to draw 18 total frames instead of 6. That is like triple the amount of work for the same screen time. And let's be honest here, I would rather draw only 6 drawings than have to draw 18 drawings for the same amount of effort. Now keep in mind, none of these are necessarily wrong. They just communicate different things. And that is the foundation of everything I'm about to show you. So let's take a look at how anime studios actually use this in practice. Take a slice of life anime like K-On! If you go frame by frame through a lot of the scenes in K-On!, you'll notice that a huge number of them are animated on 2s or even 3s. The characters aren't moving with buttery smooth motion in every single shot. During the quieter moments, like the girls just hanging out in the club room or sitting around and chatting with each other, the animation is pretty limited. But does K-On! Feel like it has bad animation? No. It feels warm, cozy, relaxed. The lower frame rate actually helps sell that vibe. And let's be real, this is a slice of life anime. This is not supposed to be this big dramatic action anime. If every scene in K-On! Was animated on 1s with hyperfluid motion, it would feel wrong. It would feel absolutely chaotic and frantic for a show that's literally supposed to be about after-school activities, cozy times, girls chatting with each other. It's quite literally in the name slice of life. Same thing with shows like Clannad. Some of the most powerful emotional scenes in that show have very few frames. Characters are standing still, there are slow camera pans, minimal movement, and yet those scenes hit harder than the most action-packed sequences in other anime, because the emotion is being carried by the composition, the music, and the pacing, not the frame count. And it goes much deeper than just how many frames are in a scene. Where you place those frames matters too. Take a look at this timing chart. When the drawings are spaced close together, the motion slows down. These are what's known as ease-ins or ease-outs. The character would gently come to a stop or slowly start moving. In contrast, when the drawings are spread far apart, the motion is fast and pretty snappy. And that's why a punch in an anime fight has barely any frames in the middle of the swing, but a ton of frames at the beginning and end. The animators are purposefully clustering drawings together where they want your eye to linger. So a quiet K-On! Scene isn't just using fewer frames overall. The frames that are there are purposefully spaced to feel gentle and relaxed. And an action scene in another show like, say, Demon Slayer, isn't just using more frames. Those frames are deliberately clustered and spread out to control exactly how fast or how slow each part of the motion feels. But let's look at the other side of the coin. Look at shows like Demon Slayer or Jujutsu Kaisen during their big fight scenes. Those scenes are animated on 1s or 2s, and sometimes they add a lot of seconds of animation where it looks like slow motion with a lot of in-between frames that makes the motion look even smoother. It looks fluid because the action demands that fluidity. Your eye needs to track fast movements, and so the animators give you more frames to process. There are also times where the animation will go into sort of this slow motion almost purposefully to give more impact to certain scenes. A good example is this kill scene from Demon Slayer, where they purposefully make everything slow motion to give more impact to how the action is performed. Obviously, if you were to flip through how many frames this takes, it takes a lot of drawings in order to make it actually look really smooth and floaty. You hear this all the time in anime discourse, where it's like, oh, these action scenes have a lot of frames, and so if an anime doesn't have a lot of frames, then it's considered low budget or low quality. But here's what people don't actually call out in these arguments. Go watch any dialogue scene in Demon Slayer, or Jujutsu Kaisen, or Attack on Titan, or any of the typical, super popular anime, any scene where the characters are just standing around and talking. Literally go in and count the frames that are happening. They are doing the exact same thing as slice of life anime like K-On! They're doing held drawings, minimal movement, limited animation, maybe literally just a mouth flap or an eye blink. That's it. Those quote-unquote amazing animation anime are using limited animation, again, similar to slice of life anime, in probably 60 to 70% of their runtime. The fluid stuff is reserved for the moments where it counts, like action scenes or really impactful scenes. Heck, I used to do the same thing in my own animations. In this scene from my anime Welcome to the Mind Palace, I deliberately kept the frame count low because the mood of the scene called for it. And then in this particular shot, we ramped it up to have more frames because I wanted the motion to feel more smooth. And there are even more creative ways that studios play with this. Sometimes you'll see a scene loop for 3 or 4 frames in a sort of boiling effect or a loop effect where something just feels subtly restless or uneasy. Or a character will snap into a more chibi design for just 2 to 3 frames to sell a comedic beat. Or there's going to be times where there's literally no animation and they actually take the PNGs in After Effects and just slide them into frame. All of these are intentional choices. The frame count is part of the storytelling. Now, all of these frame rate techniques only work if the individual drawings are solid. You can time everything perfectly, but if the character looks off model between frames, it's going to distract from everything else. That's something that I've been actively working on, and I recently took this class on Skillshare called Manga Art School by Scott Harris. One thing that stuck with me is how Scott breaks down proportions and facial structure into these base guidelines that you learn first. And then, once you've internalized them, you can start breaking away from them to develop your own style. And that directly applies to animation, because when you're drawing the same character across dozens of frames, having those proportions locked in by instinct is what keeps everything consistent without slowing you down. Skillshare is a platform with thousands of classes for creative skills, and as someone who's constantly trying to level up different parts of my workflow, being able to jump between classes on drawing fundamentals one day and motion graphics the next has been really useful. The first 500 people to use my link or scan the QR code will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Links in the description. So with that foundation in mind, let me show you the most clever example I've found of studios using frame rate as an actual storytelling tool. So remember at the beginning of this video, I showed you that scene from Frieren, where Stark is animated at a lower frame rate than Fern. Let's actually break down why that works. So during the date scene, Fern is animated with a more typical walk cycle. Her movements are animated more smoothly, it's composed, it's deliberate, and of course it is animated on 2s and 3s. Stark, on the other hand, is animated with noticeably fewer frames. His movements feel stiffer, jerkier, and if you were just looking at the scene without any context, you might think, oh, the animators just didn't put as much effort into that character. But this is the entire point. Stark is supposed to feel awkward in this scene. He himself is uncomfortable. He doesn't know what to do with himself. And the animators communicated all of that just through how many frames they gave him. That is next level animation direction. They didn't need any dialogue to tell you that he is nervous. They visually told you this through the frame rate. And this technique isn't even limited to anime. One of the most famous examples of this comes from Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. You might have seen this in a lot of articles online, but to recap, Miles Morales starts off the movie animated on 2s, or 12 drawings per second. His movements are visually choppier, clumsier, a little bit more awkward, and meanwhile, the other character, Peter B. Parker, is animated on 1s, 24 drawings per second. You can see this when they are swinging side by side. You can actually see that Peter's character model kind of flows through the air while Miles kind of stumbles through it. Again, this is an intentional animation choice. This is to show that Miles is not fully comfortable in his own skin, whereas Peter has had years to be confident in his Spider-Man role. And then at the climax of the movie, when Miles finally comes into his own as Spider-Man, his animation shifts to being animated on 1s, and all of a sudden, he is moving just as smoothly as Peter. And from the audience standpoint, you can feel that transformation, even if you can't understand why. The animators are literally animating his character growth in that moment. So whether it's a quiet date scene in Frieren or a superhero origin story in Spider-Verse, the principle is the same. The frame rate is being used as a narrative tool. And the studios that understand this are the ones creating the most memorable scenes in animation. Now I know some of you in the comment section are already typing out a comment that says, okay, but what about anime that genuinely does have bad animation? What about fight scenes that are just still images sliding around the screen? And to that I say, that is a fair point. I'm not saying that every instance of limited animation is some genius creative decision. There are absolutely cases where a studio ran out of time, or the schedule got crushed, or the outsourcing didn't come back at the quality that they expected. That happens all the time. The anime industry has very real production issues, and sometimes the end result suffers because of it. But if I wanted you to take one thing away from this video, it would be this. The frame count alone is not enough information to judge whether something is good or bad animation. If a quiet conversation scene has minimal movement and low frame count, that's probably intentional. If a climactic fight scene has minimal movement and low frame count, yeah, something might have gone wrong there, but context matters. You don't know if the studio ran out of budget. You don't know if the animators were pushed into a time crunch. You've heard horror stories of animators who spend weeks trying to get an animation done to the point where they literally live in the studio and are quite literally working themselves to death. Like I said, context matters, and you can't just assume something based purely on the fact that you don't like how something looks. And you know, I also see people say things like, oh, well, this anime clearly had way more budget than that one, and it's only because the animation was more fluid. And honestly, that's not always how it works. There are plenty of examples of incredibly fluid, well-animated sequences that were produced on modest budgets by talented animators who just knew how to make every frame count. And on the other side, there are big budget productions that just look stiff because the production schedule fell apart. And I know a lot of haters online like to throw terms like budget around. And yes, animation budget does play a role, obviously, but it's not the only factor. Scheduling, staffing, the individual talent of the key animators, and yes, the creative direction of how many frames to use and where to use them, all of that matters just as much, if not more. So the next time you're watching an anime and notice that a scene feels choppy or limited, before you jump to screaming bad animation, ask yourself, is this intentional? Is this serving the mood of the scene? Because 9 times out of 10, the answer is probably going to be yes. Frame rate in animation isn't a quality score. It is a creative tool, just like color grading or sound design or camera work or composition. And the studios that use it best are the ones that understand when to give you fluid motion and when to hold back. So now you know what to look for. So the next time you're watching an anime, pay attention to how the frame rate shifts between scenes. I guarantee you'll start catching it everywhere. And if you want to learn more about how anime studios save time and effort while still making things look cinematic, check out this video right here where I break down how studios use static images and camera tricks to animate less. Thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Thanks for visiting the Mind Palace, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.